If you lost AirPods, come to us and hopefully it will be yours and we will give it to you. The next session, the next talk will be given by this person, Dotan Emanuel. He's a team leader at Google Research. Dotan, ready or not, the stage is yours.
Thank you all. Thank you all and good afternoon. I will be mainly in this area due to some technical difficulties with the laptop. So I'm going to talk about project. Now it's better? Okay. Yeah, maybe. Okay, I will do it like this, sorry. So I'm going to talk about project Euphonia. The goal of the project is basically to give people that lost their voice back. Or give people with voice impairment their voice back. The structure of the lecture, I'm going to present the project, talk a bit about the challenges that we have, how we cope with them, show some result, and in the end I will go over the main result of the paper we published, so this will be more technical for those who are interested, and if we'll have the time. Okay. So what do I mean by giving people their voice back? So there are, as you can see on the chart, millions of people. Those numbers are referring to US alone with a speech impairment, mostly due to medical condition. And for those people, all the assisted technologies that we all have been using for the last few years, Alexa, Google Home, Assistant, will not work. And our goal was to make all those technologies accessible to everyone. So when I say speech impairment, some of you might think maybe it's heavy accent, like mine, for example, or some other things. So I would like to give, play a few examples so you understand the challenge that we were facing.
You're wrong about that.
Stop gasping.
So I don't know if you were able to understand what those people were saying. Those are participants in our experiment with severe medical condition like ALS and MS, but this is the kind of challenge we were facing. One of the interesting things when we talk with those are people that, as I said, suffer from severe medical condition. Some of them cannot move, confined to a wheelchair, and still it seems that the ability to communicate, to speak with others is the thing that frustrates them the most. At first, this didn't make sense to us, but quite fast, this made a lot of sense. I mean, in many aspects, the ability to communicate on a higher level is what makes us, a human being, and this has become a really, really important goal for us to allow them to talk with others and also to activate assistive devices. So I will now introduce Dimitri, and in a second I will let him introduce himself. Dimitri, and as you have seen in the previous slide, the audio file that I played has only code names with them because of course, privacy issues and the identification. Dimitri is a Googler, he's a research scientist, and he's deaf. And he was one of the first participants in this experiment and contribute to it a lot. And I will jump. So I told you what Project Euphonia is all about, and I'm going to jump not to the end, but let's say the latest milestone. This is a recording from a World Federation Congress of the Deaf that happened in Paris last July.
Nice to meet you. My name is Dmitry Kayevsky. I'm a research scientist at Google. What you see now, my speech is transcribed but speech recognition.
You can try to close your eyes and see if you can understand Dimitri without the caption. This would be a nice experiment.
My hearing when I was 1 year old. I former Soviet Union. I learned to speak English, but looking for every English word, looking on Russian letters. Therefore, I have strong Russian accent. And this Euphonia model is trained for my voice. It understands me very well. And now people can understand what I speak. And we also have lot.
Okay, so this was, thank you. So this was a kind of a spoiler, but for us it was a really important moment. This was Euphonia, the project that we've been working on the big screen in front of an audience of around 1,000 people in Paris, live. Dimitri was just giving his speech and then also moving to Q&A session with Euphonia on full display. So how did we manage to get at least to this point? This is not the end game yet. Okay, so Euphonia, I just skipped that, was presented at Google, on the latest Google I/O. So how it works? The idea was to take Google ASR system, which is supposed and considered to be state-of-the-art as it is, and try to improve it. So we didn't think that we can do something better than our fellow engineers who've been working for this for quite a long time, but we needed to find a different approach, and the approach was personalization. So the goal was to take samples from specific individuals like Dimitri, tailor and fine-tune a model specifically for them, and hopefully with small amounts of data we will be able to improve significantly the base model. So the first step is collect samples. It turns out that the samples that we collected were really important, like the selecting which sentences to record. They need to have phonetic coverage, meaning covering all the sounds in the English language and the way specifically that Dimitri or other participants were pronouncing them, but also cover the what we call the language model, the target set of sentences that we would like to work on. And as you can see, we have different sets of recordings or transcript that people need to record sentences. Some of them refer to the use case, like Google Home or voice access command, and some of them are more general, like the movie quotes. And this is a very high level schematic of what we are doing. So the next step would be to convert those audio examples to spectrograms. The most successful ASR system, automatic speech recognition, works based on a spectrogram and convolutional network on top of them. So we converted them to spectrograms, fine-tuned the network. I will later in the end explain how exactly we did that, and created a new personalized model. Now we took this model, installed it on device. Euphonia models are personalized and run on device, not from the cloud, not from some Google services, but specific for the user. And the result is what you have just seen. So when we got to this project, I would say those are the main challenges we were facing, or the research question that we have. So starting wear error rate, which is the way you measure ASR performance for Dimitri, for example, was something like 70%, meaning it got maybe one word out of three right. This is, of course, not usable in any context. So the question was, what would be a good enough, to start with, a good enough word error rate? Just production system are around 8 to 10%, have about 8 to 10% word error rate for native English speaker for English. I don't know how many of you use in Israel or with some other foreign accent Alexa or Google Home and know that sometimes it could be quite frustrating. The second thing was the scope of the training process or the fine-tuning. We are hoping, and we're still hoping to be able to generate a model per disease or per disease stage. For example, AS have a model that correspond to ALS patient. This will allow us to collect much less data and create a model that will help many people. But we started with the simpler task of not trying to generalize for disease, but training a model per person. Data collection proved to be a challenge by itself. Usually companies take volunteers that will record data or use existing audio set. Here we needed a very specific recording setting from people that some of them, I mean Dimitri has no problems with that, but some of them were very sick and had a problem like recording too many sentences. They got tired really easy, and speaking for them was in general a hard task, and recording large amount of data was really problematic. In order to compensate for the lack of data, let's call it, we were thinking about all kind of data augmentation. What can we do? What kind of synthetic transformation or what kind of synthetic data can we do that will help us, that will serve as training data and will help us training the model faster and better. The next point is the language model. The question was, are we going for a full ASR system like the one you saw for Dimitri that would work almost for a free text when someone can just say whatever you want in a relatively free manner and the performance will be good enough, or something that will be more dedicated? And here it's a balance. When the voice is really degraded and really hard to understand, we get to a reasonable performance for a limited vocabulary. Small set, I mean, it's not that small. It could be a few hundreds or thousands of phrases and words, but this will not be a general purpose model. And restricting the language model allow us to get results for those people. Those with less severe impairment, we can get to a much better model. And the last point we're trying to look if can we learn from the process something about how the voice changed for those diseases? For example, can we give some feedback back to the medical community or to speech therapy saying in ALS, this is what we see based on the analysis of the success and failures of an ASR system. So I will go to some of the results. So those graphs show the base word error rate, how good or how not that good the system, original system work on each participant or recognize, and what happened with the best model. And you can see that there is a varying range. The codes on the left are just the participant codes. So we got people with over 80% of word error rate, meaning existing system were completely useless, and some with less than 20% of word error rate, meaning the recognition is fairly okay. And the interesting part is the personalization improve across the board for everyone. So it's not that just those with a very severe condition benefit from personalization, but also people with mild impairment got a huge improvement in when using the best personalized model. The second question we answered or trying to answer, how much data do we need? Because I guess that some of you thought that, okay, personalized model, how can we scale this? How can we help millions of people across the world Do they all need to collect data? And will they all get their own personalized model? So the question is, that's still a challenge. But I think this graph shows some promise here, and the results are promising. It seems that we get most of the gain from something like 10 minutes of recording. So we need someone just to record 10 minutes of data to get a significant improvement in word error rate. The more you will record, the better your model will be. Dimitri recorded over 20 hours through the process, total of 20 hours. It took him a long time, many days along the last year. But again, the major jump in performance happens in the range of 5, 10, 15 minutes. Data augmentation. So we tried a few of the standard data augmentation techniques for audio, noisification, doing near field and far field, like keeping the microphone close to the speaker and far off, and also, like room noise, adding room noise and background noise. Those were useful, but did not improve much what we did. The second thing is rate. I don't know, maybe I will, in the end, replay the recording that I played in the beginning. But for most of those conditions, the speaker rate is slowed down. So it takes more energy to pronounce the sound, and the rate is slowing down. So we thought that just by speeding up the recording, of course, without changing the pitch, would help. And the third thing, I think the most interesting one, was using TTS. TTS is text-to-speech. And as I told you, the language model, the domain in which we try to improve the model is important. And some of the people were not able to record enough data. So one of the usage of the TTS, there were two usages. The first one was just to generate more examples of healthy speech in this domain. By this, fine-tuning the entire model to be more focused on a set of specific phrases. And the second is trying to mimic, using TTS with modification, to trying to mimic the kind of impairment that a person have, and in a sense generate audio that sounds like him. At this point, this was not very successful. We're still trying. I think the mimicking process, it's not clear what it is exactly contributing to the overall performance. Okay, let me just play one more video. So this would be a side-by-side comparison.
We're here with Dimitri and two Google Homes, one with the standard model here, and one with a model trained by Dimitri here. It was trained with the top 500 queries on Google Home using the Euphonia framework. And this model will be running on device, and this model will be using S3.
S3 is Google Cloud ASR.
The directions home.
Sorry, I don't know how to help with that. The best way to get home by car is via US 101 North, and will take about 1 hour and 30.
Frank Genie is a site.
Here is some information.
Sure, here are some recipes.
Hey Google, play a YouTube video.
Okay, showing equity. Okay,
videos.
playing recommended YouTube videos.
Okay, so this is an example. So those results we got them much earlier than the one that I showed before in the general speech. Once you restrict the domain and expect kind of set of commands, more predictable commands, doing ASR that does this well, even for impaired speech, is much easier. It's still not an easy task, but it's easier than the general speech. Okay, I have enough time, so I will just quickly go over the details of what we did. This is the link to the paper we published on the last inter-speech in Austria last September. So what do I mean by fine-tuning? And also in the paper we expand a bit beyond the obvious use case that we have. So if you remember, I told you that even for people with mild speech impairment, we got impressive results with personalization. And as a research team here in Tel Aviv, in Israel, mostly of Israelis, we thought that we can consider accent and a heavy accent to be kind of speech impairment, and maybe we can improve ASR for accent recognition. So we added to the data that we have also standard accented data that is used for evaluation. And so the result, you will see the Arctic data set is the data of English with foreign accents, and I will show result on this as well as the ALS data that we have. We compared two different models. The winning model, the model that Euphonia is using, is a RNNT model. It's proprietary to Google, but again, the technology and the paper is out there, and I guess that other companies have implemented this model or similar thing. Build of an encoder and decoder scheme. Encoder create a speech embedding, mostly, again, the things that I say are not strict, but mostly corresponding to the acoustic features, while the decoder adds the language model information and basically the probability of a sequence of phonemes to be one after the other and generate a coherent sentence or text. We ran experiment on the data that we have, which is mostly ALS data. We put Dimitri aside just because we didn't have other recording from deaf people. We have a bunch of ALS patients at different stages of the disease, and we have the Arctic data set. We try to fine-tune two models, the RNNT model and the LAS model. Again, so we have the data. I will not repeat the data, the number of models. Those are pretty heavy models. The interesting thing that at least the RNNT is running on device, like all of Google device starting, I think, last summer, running all the ASR on device. And those are basically the result. We can see that we can improve both heavy speech impairment and mild speech impairment. We could improve recognition on both the sick patient and the accented speech. And again, of course, the improvement, the more impaired your speech is, the improvement will be higher in absolute terms, but in relative terms, they are quite similar. Another thing is the fine-tuning. So Google models and every other ASR model is usually trained on a lot of data, tens of thousands of hours of data. And we have, as you've seen, only, let's say, something from 10 minutes to 1 hour of data for most participants. So how do we combine all this data that we have that is encompassed into the, basically into the existing model and the new data? So the idea, of course, is to fine-tune, to start with a model that is trained on the existing data and just modify it according to the to the new data. Now the models are quite big. It contains tens of millions of parameters, and the risk is that when you try to train a large model with only few examples, you will get either overfitting or the model will just memorize some of those examples. And we found out that the best way to avoid this is to train parts of the model. So as I said, the RNNT model builds from encoder and decoder, again, roughly corresponding to the acoustic properties of the speech and the text properties. What we did is froze the entire model and basically train only the joint layer and the first few layers of the encoder. The idea was or the rationalization, let's say, was, because we tried different configurations. But this did surprise us that this was the one that was successful. You can think of this as impaired speech basically represent the same language model. People are trying to say coherent sentences in English corresponding to either a command or a request that they have. But the acoustic properties of their voice is somewhat different. Some phonemes they cannot pronounce at all. Some are converted to some other phonemes. So by training the first few layers of the RNNT model, we were able to learn a new mapping of the acoustic feature while preserving all the knowledge that we got from all the data that was the model was previously trained on. And we also did some, the graph on the right is kind of trying to get insight into what happened in the phonetic language, which phoneme are harder to pronounce, easier to pronounce. We could find some major phenomena, but not something that is detailed enough or coherent enough and run across all participants. Basically, that's that. The research is ongoing. We now have personalized model. A few dozen participants, mostly ALS patient, MS, and Dimitri, of course, are using this on a daily basis. But we are collecting more data and in the hope to create, as I said before, a more generalized model. Maybe not one that will work for everyone, but one that will not work for a specific person, but for a larger and larger group of persons. The hope is that the more data that we'll get, the better generalization that we'll get for, again, a specific subgroup, and the better, again, the Google ASR that is now almost everywhere will perform for people with impaired speech. This project started here in Tel Aviv in the research team in collaboration with teams in Mountain View, and as in now in the process of integrating into Google speech team in Mountain View that is responsible for the general all ASR product across all the teams. So if you know of anyone or willing to participate, anyone with impaired speech, and you can send him the link. We'll be happy to get more people who like to are willing to contribute their data, and promise in return to provide them with a personalized model at first stage and hopefully with a more general model. That's it. Thank you. That's Project Euphonia. I would be happy to answer questions if you have any. Do we have time for questions? I'm not sure.
I recall that there was another project for people with impaired speech done in Tel Aviv. It was by a women scientist also last year, and I think it also was presented in Google I/O, but it's a different team and different project. You recall?
Yes, yes. That's there's Sapir Kadu was leading that. There's the engineer that was leading that. It's a sister team of ours, and what they were doing is. So we have two projects basically. The one is live caption, the ability to caption everything that is on the device, like create live captions for everything. This is good again for people with hard hearing or deaf. And the other project was the ability to call using text. So integrated into Google phone application, you have the ability to enter text. The other side will hear it as sound. Again, the other side, like having someone deaf talking with someone who hear normally over the phone. That's the project, which is also, I think, impressive one and deserve a presentation by itself, not this short intro that I gave. Any other questions?
There's a person there.
Please.
Thank you for the presentation. I'm kind of curious about the error rate that you presented before regarding the 10 and the 20%. I'm kind of wondering if, or exactly what, how can you precisely can judge if it's an error or not? Meaning that if, for example, you got some kind of recognition of a word, but it turns out not to be, the guy said potato and you translated to tomato. So they kind of similar. So in, for example, a dice coefficient, you can say that maybe it's a mistake for the model here, but it's still kind of similar. And there is another option that the guy said potato and you got translated this to car. Is there like kind of a differentiation of the error rate by this measure?
Yes, so measuring, that's a very good question. Measuring word error rate is measuring the quality of speech recognition system is a difficult question, and it depends on the use case. Just taking your example, for example, tomato and potato might sound similar, but they are of course different. If I'm ordering, a potato soup and I'm getting a tomato soup, I didn't get what I want. So there are other kind of mistakes where, when you say things with and without an S, or plural versus singular, that even though there are clear mistakes, when you talk to someone, it's the receiver side can autocorrect them easily. So the standard industry is word error rate, basically taking the transcript of the sentence and just doing a distance based on the number of omission, deletion, and insertion. Again, when you want to present something, when you want to publish a paper, and when you want to compare it to other systems, you should use the standard techniques. But I must say that there are at least 4 different word error rate. One on rare words versus like more common words, like long tail versus short tail. One that take the part in the sentence, whether you talk about the subject of the verb, which are more important maybe than the other parts. But all the results here are using the standard flat, let's call it, word error rate.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this talk and for the amazing work that you're doing. Before